Hey everyone! Hope you're all doing well this week. We have another new interesting story for ya, or should we say, very old story for you. This week, we're taking it all the way back to the late 1800s for another true crime story plus an added bonus, a ghost story as well. Sit back, grab a snack and a drink of choice and relax while we tell you the true horrifying story of a woman who solved her own murder by coming back from the grave. West Virginia joined the Union during the Civil War, splitting from the rest of Virginia which joined the Confederacy. On April 20th of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln claimed that West Virginia would become its own state after a 60-day waiting period, making it our 35th state. Still, in the 1800s before the turn of the 20th century, times were hard, especially for single women. Elva Zona Heisterschuh, or just Zona as she liked to be called, knew this all too well. Zona had came to the area with her mother Mary Jane Heister and had been known around the area as someone who loved to have a good time. A lot of the local men were uninterested in her though because she had had a child out of wedlock, and in those days, it was extremely looked down upon. It's unknown how she came to meet Erasmus Dribbling Troutschuh, or Edward as he was known locally, but it would soon prove to be her undoing. Edward was a local blacksmith, which is someone who works with hot steel to make things like knives, swords, horseshoes and many other things of that nature. Perhaps she was getting some shoes for her horse when they met. Who knows? What is known though is that Zona took an immediate liking to Edward and the pair soon became inseparable. In a whirlwind romance, they were married within a month of meeting each other. She had no idea of the mistake she had just made. Edward was about 10 or 11 years older than Zona. She was in her mid-20s and an extremely vibrant and beautiful woman for her time. Although she had a child, Zona had never been married yet, but Edward couldn't claim the same. At just around the age of 35, he had already been married twice and widowed twice under mysterious circumstances. One of his wives supposedly fell off a hayloft in a barn and one had a rock dropped on her head in a chimney accident. Yeah. Okay. He most likely forgot to leave all this out before the nuptials. Zona may have been smitten with her new man, but her mother definitely was not in the least. She claimed that she had a bad feeling about him from the minute she first heard about him and begged her daughter not to marry him, but it was no use. In November of 1896, they were married much to her mother's displeasure. Still, her daughter seemed to be very happy and very much in love, until that January, that is. On January 23, 1897, a neighbor boy who often loved to come visit Nona's child and help with chores came to the home of the Schuh family and made a terrifying discovery. Nona lay dead at the bottom of her staircase. He ran for help and soon, friends, family and authorities showed up to remove the body. Edward was beside himself with grief and had to be consoled before anyone could ask him any questions. Mama Mary had her doubts though. From the very start, Edward started to act very strange, but many around him just thought it was from the shock and grief of losing his wife. They called the local town doctor in, a man named Dr. George Knapp, who had trouble examining the body due to Edward holding on to her and crying. After a very brief examination, Dr. Knapp said that he thought her cause of death was everlasting faint, whatever that is. Spoiler alert, he was wrong. We'll get there though. In those days, women usually took care of the bodies of other deceased women, but Edward wouldn't let anyone near her. He laid a red sheet in her coffin and dressed her and wouldn't let anyone else get near her. Even her own mother had trouble saying her goodbyes to her loving daughter, but luckily Edward must have stepped away for just long enough to allow her mother to visit Zona's body. She took the red sheet from the coffin and took it home to wash. When she did, a red blood-like substance came from the material, which just made Mary even more curious. Did this man who married her daughter hurt her somehow? That night as a poor, grieving mother was going to bed, she asked out loud if Zona's spirit could hear her and asked her to tell her what happened to her. Little did she know that the ghostly apparition of her deceased daughter was about to make an appearance. When Mary Jane looked up, you can imagine her surprise to see the ghost of Zona standing there before her. Zona's spirit soon began to tell her mother the entire story of her marriage to Edward. Almost immediately, as soon as she moved in with him in their two-story cabin-type home, Edward started to become both physically and emotionally abusive. The night she died, he had came home from work and was furious because she hadn't made him what he wanted for dinner. Zona had made a dinner for him, but they had no meat, which was what caused him to fly into a rage. The ghostly spirit visited her mother for the course of 4 nights in a row. On her final night, she told her mother of how he had strangled her and crushed her windpipe and had broken the vertebrae in her neck, and to show her mother, she spun her head all the way around before finally disappearing. Her mother was absolutely stunned and shocked. Mary Jane told her brother and her neighbors of her ghostly visits, and her brother convinced her to go see the local prosecutor named Donna Preston, who at first thought that it was just the imagination of a grieving mother, but when he spoke to Dr. Knapp and found out that he barely got to examine the body, they decided to look into it further. An excavation of Zona's grave and a new autopsy was scheduled for February. Edward was furious and tried to fight it, but lost. Not only was he going to have to go through it, he was going to have to sit right there the entire time while medical examiners did their work. There were no major hospitals then, so the autopsy was done at an old one-room schoolhouse that was no longer in use. Edward was sitting there with a knife, whittling away at an old stick, seemingly bored until they started to examine the neck area. He had already blurted out something peculiar. He claimed when it was decided when and where it would take place that, "You can't prove I did it." Kind of an odd thing to say, don't you think? They noticed marks on the neck area that looked like finger marks that had dug into the windpipe area, and they saw that it had indeed been crushed. They also found the broken neck bones that was consistent to the story given by Zona's spirit. Edward's gig was finally up. In court, the prosecution was never going to bring up the story of Zona's ghost out of fear of the jury thinking it was crazy, but the defense made a major mistake by bringing it up, and Zona's mother didn't hold back. She told them everything that Zona's ghost had told her over the course of 4 nights and about the red liquid that came from the sheet in her coffin. Another witness had even brought up that Ed had said that he wanted to be married 7 times. Was this guy a serial killer? Ed had been previously convicted of horse thievery, which in those days was a very serious offense. That and the fact that he had previous wives who had died under mysterious circumstances, and his attitude in general didn't really endear him with the folks whose fate was in their hands. Perhaps he should have tried more of those fake tears that he used back when he was first caught. Anywho, the jury found him guilty, but it wasn't unanimous, so instead of the death penalty, he received life in prison. Before he could be transferred though, a mob of angry townspeople wanted to give him their own brand of justice and soon came at the courthouse prepared to lynch him alive. The sheriff calmed the crowd down though and sent everyone home, although 4 of the men were later arrested and sent to jail for inciting a riot. It was said that Edward was so shaken up and terrified of the angry mob that he could barely reach down and tie his shoe because he was shaking so badly. I wonder if Zona's spirit was anywhere where she could watch? I'll bet she would have loved to see him scared the way he had done her. He was soon shipped to his final home. On a side note, this was the first case, and I think maybe the only case I know of a ghost solving her own murder. After being sent to the state prison in his mid-30s, he didn't stay there very long. He was only there for maybe 2 or 3 years before some type of strange illness epidemic broke out and he died before turning 40. At least they didn't have to worry about him hurting anyone else's mother or daughter. Good riddance, a-hole! If you're in a situation like this, here's a number to get some help. Get out before it's too late. Another great idea is learning self-defense. Not only is it a great way to stay in shape, it's a great way to spend time with your kids, as most towns have classes for all ages. On that note, we hope you liked the story this week. I've been meaning to cover it for some time now. If you haven't picked up a t-shirt or mug, why not? We all need clothes and something to drink, coffee and hot chocolate from our tea for some of y'all. The link's below. Thanks again, till next time.